happy Friday, secular fam. Sorry, what's good in the hood? And literally, I mean, what good trouble do you hope to get into this weekend? And where is it happening? Let us know in the chat and make sure you switch from hosts and panelists to everyone with that little button on the bottom there. Is there an action, an act of resistance, a postcard writing party, rock painting? Let us know, put it in the chat and let us know where it is because there is a lot going on these days. On Saturday, May 31st, so that's not tomorrow, but next Saturday, Shadow Rock Church, who was our gracious host for the Secular Summit back in January, they are now hosting the Desert Progressives Indivisible group and are hosting a Tell Me How You Really Feel town hall from 4 to 5:30. I'm going to drop this Mobilize link in the chat, but I know for a fact that Representative Stephanie Simicek will be there. Board Representative from Washington, L. Kyle Clayton will be there. Congresswoman Yasmin Ansari will be there, and Senator Annalise Ortiz. So you will not want to miss that. Like I said, I want to drop that in the chat for you so you all know where that is and how you can register. Again, make sure that you change that little blue button there from hosts and panelists to everyone so that we can all see what actions you're participating in. Next week, we're actually going to be speaking with Dan Barker. I cannot believe that we're going to be speaking with Dan Barker because if you don't know Dan, you're in for a treat. From evangelical pastor to staunch atheist, Dan has been involved with the free thought movement for decades now. So tell all of your contacts because Dan is a great speaker. But for today, we are speaking, and I didn't ask how to pronounce this, so hopefully I'm getting it right. We are speaking with Scott Latta. Am I saying that right? Okay, good. He's a whole lot of fun, I bet. That's a joke you've heard a million times before. He is an award-winning journalist who has spent a decade reporting for humanitarian organizations on conflict, displacement, and climate change all around the world. His writing has been featured in The Believer, CityLab, Modern Farmer, The All, and the Southampton Review, which awarded him the Frank McCourt Memoir Prize in 2016. He's also the author of Gods of the Smoke Machine, which, by the way, I think would be an excellent band name. Gods of the Smoke Machine, Power, Pain, and the Rise of Christian Nationalism in the Megachurch, which is currently available for pre-order and will be out in October of 2025. Scott spends his time in Portland, Oregon. One of our board members, actually, our chair, is in Oregon, in Albany. And I know quite a few people from Arizona for some reason or another who are moving to the Pacific Northwest. Not quite sure why. So happy that you're here, Scott. Is there anything that I missed in your bio?
No, you nailed it. Thanks.
I'm going to just go ahead and hand it over to you. I will monitor the questions and we're going to save the questions, folks. Feel free to ask any questions, but we'll save them till the end of Scott's presentation. So with that, Scott, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeannie. Thanks, everybody. Happy Friday. It's great to meet you. Great to be here. Um, yeah, I'm excited to be here to talk about this weird little book that I wrote that's coming out later this year. And I know my family is excited for me to have someone else to talk about it with, and I'm excited to talk about it. So appreciate everyone coming and being here. And yeah, I know you got a long weekend ahead of you, so I'll get into it. So megachurches. It's quite the topic, right? What is a megachurch? What does it mean now? How's the landscape changing? I actually think this is a really interesting moment to talk about the role that really large churches play in the U.S. And part of that is because I think we've probably all seen statistics about the landscape of evangelicalism, how the numbers are shifting. It's kind of hard to get hard data on this, and you can kind of tell whatever story you want with the data that you see. So, there's data out there that evangelicalism is shrinking. People are walking out of churches. I saw an article last week about how Gen Z is going back to church, that they're reversing those trends, right? So there's a lot of different ways to kind of get your head around it. But I think that in general, there's some trends that you can draw, and megachurches play a really critical, like very powerful role right now. But whatever the landscape of evangelicalism in the US, there's this really interesting second story that's happening in really large churches. And that's that a lot of these big churches are growing, they're flourishing. Some of them are growing really wildly, they're wildly successful. And I learned a lot in reporting this book over the last couple of years about the landscape. So I'll share my screen here because I put some visuals together. And I will show you. I hope everyone can see that. So it can be kind of tricky to, like I said, to get hard data, especially on megachurches specifically. But there is one way that we can do it. So every 5 years, the survey comes out from the Hartford Institute for Religion Research. And this is the one that I use for my book, Megachurch 2020. There's going to be a new one coming out this year. I'm very excited to see it, very much looking forward to it. But for my book, I use this one. And this survey is really interesting because so the landscape of megachurches in the US, there's 1,750 of them, give or take. So 1,750 megachurches nationwide. Arizona has three. Congratulations. You've got number three, Christ Church of the Valley, the third largest church in America in the Phoenix area. Dream City Church in the Phoenix area is number 30. And then Sun Valley Community Church is number 71. So I came to Arizona in the fall in the lead up to the election because I wanted to kind of take the temperature of the area more or less. And I visited some of these churches, and you've got quite the interesting political scene in Arizona. I'll leave it at that. But it was great. It was 109 degrees in October when I got there, Jeannie, which is, I think, why so many of your friends are moving to the Northwest because it's, I think, 59 degrees here right now. I left the glorious autumn of Oregon and came to the desert hellscape in the middle of October. But it was great. Had a great time. Very eye-opening. What is a megachurch? So the generally understood definition of a megachurch is that you need 2,000 weekly attendees to qualify as a megachurch. That number's a little arbitrary to me. It's a little odd. I mean, is a church with 1,900 people that different than a church with 2,100? No, not really. Both of those are completely different than a church with 60,000, which some of these churches have. So when I was reported this book, what was helpful for me to get my head around the landscape was to think of megachurches by a different definition, a more kind of almost sociological definition, which is that a church on this scale, a large church, it wants to just reach into lots of different areas of your life. It wants to be your church on Sunday, but it also wants to be your friend group, it wants to be your kids' friend group, it wants to be your weekly small group, it wants to be the podcast you listen to, the music on your phone, the hoodie on your back, the beanie on your head, the coffee in your cup, your marriage counselor. It might be your workplace, it could be your kid's school. It wants to be all these different areas of your life, which can be great. That can be really fulfilling if you find that church a fulfilling place to go. But the cost of that is that if you experience some kind of hurt or harm or trauma, even at a large church like this, you don't just lose your church, you lose it all. You lose all of that stuff. And so the reason I wanted to write this book was to kind of spotlight stories of people who had experienced hurt or even trauma inside these really large churches and to take the microphone away from the guys in the pulpits who have these huge bully pulpits and to give it to the people who really got lost in these big crowds and experienced hurt and had no power and no recourse and to share their stories. And so data was really important to kind of set the landscape of the scene. And this survey actually was really important. So what are these trends, right? Okay, so let's look at some of these trends. And you can see, first of all, some things that jump out to me really interesting is that in the last 5 years, or in the 5 years leading up to this survey, 2015 to 2020, megachurches were growing. They grew by 34%. So they grew by a third. And this is a period of time when, you look at the trends in evangelicalism and everyone says people are leaving church. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Convention in the South, largest denomination in America. And the SBC has been bleeding members for years. But in this 5 year period, large churches were growing. Why? That immediately begs the question, why? And this number really jumps out to me for why. So 70% of megachurches in 2020 are multi-site megachurches. And that is a complete reverse of the model of the way it used to be. So in the 2000 megachurch survey, just 20 years before, 77% of megachurches were single site. So this number completely flipped, right? So the single site megachurch, that's the big arena. That's the Joel Osteen Arena Church that holds 16,000 people. That's the Righteous Gemstones Church where you come and it's like being in an NBA arena. That model is completely over. A lot of megachurch pastors, I met some for this book that told me that a big building to them feels like a burden. It can cost thousands of dollars just to turn on the lights. They have millions of dollars in debt. The new model is to spread out throughout a city with small locations, basically franchises. So Christ Church the Valley in Phoenix, where I came in October, I think when I came there, they had 17 locations in the city. Church of the Highlands in Alabama has 26 across the state. So, I mean, they're like UPS stores, they're like Chipotle's, they're franchises, right? And it makes sense because if your goal was to bring as many people as possible into your brand, if you wanted to launch a hardware store that did this, would you build the biggest possible hardware store you could? No, you'd build five throughout your city. And that's what megachurches are doing. And what's interesting about it is that because there's so many locations and they offer so many services, you can sit in a service in one of the largest churches in America, and there might not be 200 people actually in the room with you. When I went to CCV, there were probably less than 200 people in the room. And because they had taken over the building of a previous church that didn't make it, that's another big trend. It we sat on a pew. There was stained glass in the building. It didn't feel like a cliche sort of megachurch. It felt like a liturgical kind of old school church space. So the band comes on, they play live music. You've got real people around you. And then the worship service ends, the band goes off the stage, they turn on a screen and they live stream a pastor who's not there. He might be 40 miles away or 200 miles away. He preaches a service over video, the band comes back up and you go home. So for someone who's like has social anxiety or who might be introverted, you can still go to a mega church. You could just sit in the back with a couple hundred people and then walk out and that's it. So the days of like the cliche mega mall, mega church arena are really over. That's changed really rapidly. So other things that are interesting. So megachurches remain predominantly white and majority female, which is interesting because especially when you get into stories of things like harm or hurt or even trauma in the megachurch, and how hard it is for people to have a voice in these churches, these numbers really matter. So in this survey that comes out every 5 years, there is a section on politics. And so what I think might be interesting today is to talk about how these churches coalesce power and how they wield power, specifically political power. And so the section on politics was really kind of surprising to me. If you see the header at the top, you might be a little surprised. I know I was when I saw it, which is that megachurches overwhelmingly avoid political action. That's how it's described in this survey. And when I saw that header, I was surprised because it's very case closed sort of language, right? And it also kind of, I would say, cuts against my lived experience of going to really large churches. I grew up in a large church in the South that was very political. Every year on the 4th of July, they had Celebrate America Sunday, and they bring in some speaker who's now like a far right personality. And it just felt like you were in a political space. So I was curious about this, and you can see how they describe it here, where the authors say that our research finds that megachurches as a whole claim to be involved in very little overt political action. And that's the phrase that I was kind of curious about, overt political action. So what does that mean for the sake of this survey? Well, look at how they word the question, and it kind of starts to become clear. So this is the first thing to remember is this is megachurches self-reporting. In this survey, about 582 churches actually responded. So it's about a third of the megachurches in the US. But look how they word the question. In the past 12 months, has the congregation organized any groups, meetings, classes, or events specifically focused on the following activities: distributing voter guides, getting people registered to vote, encouraging people to vote, discussing politics, organizing a demonstration or a march, or organizing to lobby elected officials? Those are really specific actions, I would say, and also the much more the extreme end, I would say, of actions that a church could take, lobbying elected officials. But the way that they word this question is interesting to me because it's not, do you discuss politics from the pulpit? It's, have you organized any groups to discuss politics or distribute voter guides? And I would say that that is less likely what you're going to feel when you go into the typical megachurch on a Sunday. And the authors of this study and a lot of people who write from the evangelical perspective on megachurches, they go to great lengths to frame these political churches as lone wolves or extreme examples. So there might be 25 notorious political megachurch pastors in America, but what about the other 1,725 that you don't hear about who aren't political, right? Well, what became clear to me in reporting this book is that there's a couple ways that megachurches wield political power. They can do soft power, where a pastor uses his influence from the pulpit to shape people's thoughts and opinions. You start to feel what you should believe just by nature of sitting there and listening to him. Or they can use hard power. They can actually do these extreme political actions. A lot of churches do, and I'll show you some in a second. But it's less likely that you're going to go to a megachurch and join a group that's organizing to distribute voter guides than it is to go to a church that uses soft power. And this is an example of one. The sound's not working on Zoom, so you're not going to be able to hear what he says, but I'll kind of talk over it. So this is Pastor Chris Hodges from Church of the Highlands. It's the second largest church in America. It's in Birmingham, Alabama. I mentioned it's got 26 locations across America. So what he's saying here is that if you look at the landscape right now, I'm just grieved by you just look around, you see drag queens everywhere, and they're fighting to get in libraries to read little kids' stories. And there's this whole trans movement, and everyone wants you to accept it. And, can I just share what's on my heart? I'm just grieved by America's thirst for abortion. That's what he's saying right now. That's the phrase he just used. America's thirst for abortion. What is going on? That's a political action, right? He's taking a political act right there in the pulpit. Now, he's not organizing any groups to lobby elected officials, but he's bringing politics into the pulpit. He's drawing a line between what he believes, what he wants the church to believe, and what the other side believes. And sitting there listening to him, you feel like you need to go along with it. It's a political act. It's not reflected on that survey, but it's definitely a political action. This is another one. This is Pastor Stephen Furtick from Elevation Church in Matthews, North Carolina, the 24th largest church in America. So right here, he's cracking a joke, and he says, "We're about to head out to the West Coast. We're going to tell some liberals out there about Jesus." And then he says, "Oh, I'm just kidding. We love the West Coast." And he cracks a big smile, right? Getting a cheap, easy laugh. That's a political act, right? He doesn't have to say that. He doesn't have to do that, but he's drawing a line. He's bringing politics into the pulpit in a way that wouldn't be reflected on that survey. This one probably comes a lot closer to the line of taking an actual like extreme political action. This is a church in Texas, and oops, sorry, go back. This is a church in Texas, and what he's doing here is he's saying when the government tells you that because you want to live your life by biblical standards, that your actions are no longer constitutional, is that liberty? When they tell the photographer, take the pictures, when they tell the baker, bake the cake, when they tell the church, you have to accept same-sex marriage, is that liberty? That's a extreme, blatant political action in a way where he's using soft power to influence his congregation who to believe these things in a way that's not listed on that survey. So this is a very common way. It's probably the most common way that you feel these churches be political. So when I see a header like that in the survey that megachurches overwhelmingly avoid political action, I struggle with that. I have a hard time seeing it that way because I've sat in so many of these churches, as a lot of us have, and it feels like a political space. At the same time, because there are so many of these churches and they're so big, even small percentages of churches that do admit to taking hard political action reach hundreds of thousands of people. So if just 14% of megachurches organized to distribute voter guides. That's 245 churches in the US. And if each of those churches has just the minimum of 2,000 people, that's a minimum of 490,000 people who go to megachurches that distribute voter guides. If half of those churches have 5,000 people, that number is over 800,000. And if you get a couple of Church of the Highlands or CCVs in there, that number could easily get over 1 million people go to megachurches that distribute voter guides. So, I mean, look at these other numbers. Churches that organized to participate in a demonstration or march. 250,000 people go to megachurches. 122 churches do this, and 105,000 people minimum go to churches that lobby elected officials. So, I mean, this notion that political megachurch pastors are lone wolves. I mean, I think the error in the formatting of this question, it assumes that all the power a church can have is limited to the pulpit, where that hasn't been true for decades, but it's especially not true now when these guys have podcasts and Substacks and book deals and they're doing their YouTube channels and things like that. Political power is not just limited to a Sunday morning service. It's 7 days a week now. And I'll show you examples of that in a minute. But this is what hard political power looks like. It probably won't surprise you that to distribute a voter guide in a megachurch, it does not necessarily have to be a nonpartisan, objective exercise. So this is a voter guide that was distributed by Gateway Church in Texas. Now, Gateway Church is the eighth largest church in America, or they were before their pastor, Robert Morris, was indicted on 5 counts of lewd or indecent acts with a child, which he was earlier this year. They're probably going to drop down that list. But for now, they're the eighth largest church in America. And in 2018, they distributed this voting guide for the election between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. And what is a voting guide supposed to do, right? Lots of churches do this. What's a voting guide supposed to be? It's supposed to be an objective look at what candidate A believes and what candidate B believes, and to inform voters so that they can make an informed decision of who they want to vote for. Well, here's the language that the Gateway Church voter guide used: men and women's bathrooms, boys and girls showers. Ted Cruz opposes, Beto O'Rourke supports it. Abortion rights was framed as right to life, defunding Planned Parenthood, pain capable to the Unborn Child Act. Ted Cruz supports right to life, Beto O'Rourke opposes it. Citizen safety, what is that? What does that even mean? Defunding sanctuary cities that harbor illegals who have committed criminal acts, stronger penalties for criminal illegal aliens. Ted Cruz supports, Beto O'Rourke opposes. This is dripping with partisan language, right? This is not an objective voter guide by any stretch of the imagination. And so there's no guardrails on what a church could put in a voter guide. This is a way that they influence congregations and wield power. This voter guide is put together by an organization called Vision America. And if you look them up on their website, they have guidelines for political activities that are allowed by churches and pastors. So, what actually are churches legally allowed to do? Lobby for legislation. Yes, churches can do that and pastors can do that. Spending money related to state referendums. Yes, that's legal. Churches and pastors both can do that. Distributing candidate surveys or voter guides. Yep, churches and pastors can do that. We just saw it, and you can put whatever you want on there. Distributing political statements in church parking lots. That's legal for a church to do. You can have people walk their parking lot handing out political statements. Renting church lists to political candidates at fair market value. That's legal. Running political ads in church bulletins and newsletters. Also legal. So, I mean, churches have a lot of leeway for what political actions they're allowed to take. And really, the only thing you're not supposed to do as a church is, as a pastor, you're not supposed to directly endorse candidates from the pulpit. They do it anyway. I'll show you an example of how they do that in a minute. It's called the Johnson Amendment, and theoretically, if a pastor does that, then it could jeopardize the tax exempt status of the church. They do it anyway, and the IRS has no interest in auditing churches. Less than 1%, I think less than half of 1% of IRS audits are on churches. So these guys know that the IRS doesn't care. They do it anyway. And it can be really blatant. So in 2022, the Texas Tribune and ProPublica dug around and found 20 churches, many of them mega churches, that were violating federal law by openly endorsing candidates from the pulpit. Many of them were mega churches. And this is what one of those looks like. So you won't be able to hear it, but I think you'll get the gist of it. So this is a pastor, Landon Schott. Oh, you can read what he's saying here. So obviously, churches don't endorse candidates, right? I'm not allowed to endorse candidates, but my name's Landon, and I'm a person before I'm a pastor. And as an individual, I endorse Nate Schatzline. He was running for Texas House. People are cheering. I would encourage you to look up Nate, get to know him. If you live in his district, come out to one of his events. So you can kind of see, I mean, you can't kind of see, it's really blatant, the rhetorical sleight of hand that he's doing here, which is, I'm not endorsing him as a pastor. I'm endorsing him as an individual. And everyone's cheering and clapping. So I'm not doing this as a pastor. I just happen to be wearing a suit and talking into a microphone and standing on a stage in a megachurch in front of a huge audience on a Sunday morning, right? But I'm not doing this as a pastor. I mean, it's extremely blatant, and you get this a lot. But again, the IRS has no interest in policing this, and the pastors have no interest in following the guideline. This one is really blatant. Jack Hibbs is kind of notorious. You might know Jack Hibbs if you kind of follow the winds of megachurch evangelicalism. You might know him. So he pastors a church, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills in California, and he has probably played chicken with the IRS more than any other pastor. And in this clip, this is the election when Steve Garvey, the former baseball player, was running for Senate in California. He openly endorses Steve Garvey in this clip. You won't be able to hear it, but he says, "I want to right now encourage all of you to vote for Steve Garvey. We have to elect Steve Garvey." And I'll show you here. So see if you can pick up on what he's doing. So this is him saying, "I want to encourage all of you to vote for Steve Garvey. And then he says, I just remember it's illegal for me to do that in the pulpit. He says that. I just remember that I'm not legally allowed to do that in the pulpit. So watch what he does here. So he steps out from behind the pulpit and he stands in front of it, right? Now he says, Jeannie's dying over here on the Zoom window. Sorry, Jeannie. So now he says, we have to elect Steve Garvey to the Senate. We have to have him represent us. And people are just like staring, like wide-eyed at this. And then he says he's your only option for Senate. We've got to vote for Steve Garvey. This is a megachurch service. It's a church service on a Sunday morning. And he says, there, that was legal. All I had to do was step around the pulpit right there. So, I mean, what you see is what you get. I mean, this is what hard power looks like in a church, right? In a large church. So there's guys who kind of come in through the back door and they joke about drag queens and trans rights and libraries. And then there's guys who like openly endorse candidates from the pulpit as individuals. And so again, like I think about that survey about how megachurches avoid political power. I mean, I don't see it. Like I think that sure, there's probably a lot of pastors who don't do that, but the platforms of the guys who do are so big that it doesn't take many to reach hundreds of thousands of people or more. So this is what power can look like in a really large church and why it matters. And so what did this look like in 2024? So in 2024, I came to Arizona for a minute because I was so the final third of the book is about the run up to the 2024 election and the role that megachurches played. And so I was curious about what it looked like. And I followed a couple interesting characters in the year and a half leading up to the election. One of them is this guy here with his back turned, Sean Foyt. He's a former, oh, genie. He's a former worship leader at a mega church called Bethel Church in California. You probably know him. He is now kind of just like a far right worship influencer, I guess you'd say, and a political troll. So he started all these nonprofits and he's made millions of dollars. And it his really a lot of his political rage started during the pandemic. A lot of that's really common for a lot of these guys who are political. It started during the pandemic. That's when Sean started this kind of nationwide tour he called "Let Us Worship," where they would go to cities. Portland was one of them, where he came here during that summer 2020, which we all remember well, how kind of wild and chaotic that summer was, especially in a place like here. He came here and set up and decided to have a huge worship service in the middle of downtown Portland. He went to Minneapolis and did it right at the corner where George Floyd was murdered. He led a worship service and he was a go-to guest on Fox News and that became his thing. And so leading up to the election, he started another tour called Kingdom to the Capitol, where he went and he played 50 worship concerts in front of all 50 state capitals. And so I went to see him here in Salem, Oregon, and then he came to Arizona. That was one of the last ones that might have been the last one actually that he did right before the election. So he was one of the guys I wanted to follow, and the other guy I wanted to follow was Mark Driscoll, who, if you have followed kind of the winds of evangelicalism in the last 2 decades, you probably know Mark Driscoll. He was probably the most notorious megachurch pastor of the 21st century. He started Mars Hill Church in Seattle, grew it into a massive and massively influential megachurch that I think had 15 locations at its peak across 5 states. He was hugely influential to a whole generation of young men, myself included, when I was younger, who I would stream his sermons on iTunes while I was at work on the other side of the country. He was also an abusive bully behind closed doors, and the whole church collapsed and dissolved. There's an entire podcast series about him that I recommend if you're interested, called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, that Christianity Today put on. It's very thoroughly reported. It's from a Christianity Today perspective, but they do a good job actually recapping how he consolidated power, how he rewrote bylaws, all the minutia of how these guys orchestrate things behind closed doors. He did that. And so when that happened, the elders and the leadership at Mars Hill wanted to put him through kind of a 2 year restoration process where he would go through counseling and he would be kind of biblically restored to the pulpit and then he could come back. He rejected that, dissolved the church, and he moved to Arizona, where he's now your neighbor, and he started Trinity Church in Scottsdale. And Trinity Church is now a megachurch. So he's doing it all over again. And I hadn't seen a lot of reporting on what was happening at Trinity, so I wanted to go see that. But first, I wanted to see Sean Foyt because he was doing this tour, and I thought that was interesting. So I went to Kingdom to the Capitol in Salem, Oregon. And so Sean drove this big chrome bus across America. And immediately you can see what was interesting to me, which is who sponsored this tour. The logo there on the right, Turning Point USA Faith, Charlie Kirk's organization, right? Also your neighbor in Arizona. Uh, so Turning Point brought Sean on as a consultant. They sponsored this tour. So immediately right there, there's alignment between a purely political organization and someone who comes from a megachurch background. So Sean was the worship leader at Bethel Church in California. And you guys have had some great guests on before who have really highlighted the rise of the charismatic Pentecostal kind of corner of Christianity. Matthew Taylor, L. Hardy, great authors whose books really helped me. And I interviewed Matthew Taylor for my book. His research really helped me understand a lot how guys like Sean Foyt came to power and what it means. So this church that Sean comes from, Bethel Church, was the church that really launched New Apostolic Reformation, NAR, the Seven Mountain Mandate, where Christians, charismatic Christians, feel called to capture all seven mountains of modern society, right? That's where Sean Foyt is from. So this is oh, and so you see a lot of charismatic and Pentecostal iconography while you're there. This is a woman blowing a shofar, blowing a ram's horn. You also saw this at the Capitol on January 6th, by the way. So it felt it's a very kind of ferocious corner of Christianity, right? So at these events, there's healings, there's speaking in tongues, there's laying of hands, all of these things. And this is just a still, a random still from a video that I just took on my phone standing off to the side. And even in this random still, you can kind of start to see how much iconography, like far right iconography you see here. So obviously there's a Trump flag. That's the point of this whole thing. There's also a Christian flag, the white flag with the red cross and the blue square. This also flew at the Capitol on January 6th. It's harder to see, but this is the Turning Point USA logo, Charlie Kirk's organization. They had a representative there who came up on stage who was pushing resources and learning guides and books and selling merchandise. Like they were all over this event. Uh, this is harder to see, but this tent right here, this is the Gonzalez flag, the flag that says "Come and take it," that has the cannon on it. This also flew at the Capitol on January 6th. So you saw those flags, things like that. And then this gentleman's hard to see, but I'll show you in a second. This is a pastor named Jay Koopman. He's part of Sean's sort of entourage that goes around with him. And he's from Harvest Rock Church, which is the other church that really launched NAR, New Apostolic Reformation. So Matthew Taylor has reported extensively. Che Ahn was the pastor that came from there. He's a huge luminary in like influential Pentecostalism. So Sean and Jay Koopman from Bethel and Harvest Rock, I mean, they are right from the two churches that have really kind of mainstreamed like Pentecostal charismatic Christianity. And of course in the Trump White House, that has become the new religious right. I mean, that's what Matthew Taylor said in my book. Like, this is the new religious right in the Trump White House. So Sean and Mark Driscoll have become close, which is interesting. And I was curious about that because my reflection, the way I remember Mark Driscoll, I didn't remember him being super political. I didn't remember him, certainly didn't remember him aligning himself so openly with like charismatic Pentecostal Christians. He was considered a more like reformed Christian, that corner of Christianity at the time. And so, apologies, you won't be able to hear this clip, but this is a podcast that they had together, Sean Foyt and Mark Driscoll. And what Sean's describing Kingdom to the Capitol here. And what he's saying is he says that people have not seen what I've seen. I've been to 46 capitals across America, and every one of those is a hard blue dot of gospel resistance. The government has failed us. And so, what Driscoll asked him here is there any explanation for why a Christian would support the Harris Walls campaign at all? Any justification for a Christian to vote for Harris Walls? And Sean like closes his eyes tight and he just says like, absolutely not, absolutely not. Even the evangelicals for Harris group, who I call the heretics for Harris. Uh, so there's become a very tight alignment between Driscoll and these guys, which I thought was interesting. There's a researcher named Jessica Johnson who has researched Driscoll really thoroughly. She embedded herself at Mars Hill Church for 2 years, and she wrote a book about it called Biblical Porn. She'd make a great guest here. Uh, I asked her, was he always like this? Because that was not the way I remembered him. Was he always this political? And she said, yes and no. She said, I saw seeds of it back then, but certainly not in this way. He used to kind of materialize demons in people's lives, the way she described it. But he would also kind of poke fun at charismatic traditions and like speaking in tongues and things like that. But she called him a chameleon. Like he can kind of shift his shape and colors. And after he dissolved Mars Hill and moved to Arizona, he needed a new crowd to run with, basically, was how she explained it. And she actually gave an interview 6 years ago, 7 years ago, where she predicted that he was going to start aligning himself with more like charismatic prosperity gospel televangelist types. And that's exactly what he's done. And so it's interesting. So I asked Matthew Taylor about this for the book about Driscoll specifically because I'm surprised to kind of see him with this crowd. And it was kind of funny the way he described it. He described this sort of like charismatic corner of Christianity as an amoeba. He said it's like an amoeba, and these guys are like little organelles that just kind of float in and out. Like Driscoll will float in for a little bit, and then he'll float out. He'll float over here. Sean Foyt will float in. You'll have Charlie Kirk float in. He said, but they're not like bound by a shared theological belief. They're bound by a shared political beliefs, right? They're not there to further the footprints of their own churches. They're there to further their own brands. Like you could see it right here. Like even in this screenshot, there's no logo for Trinity Church, but Driscoll's book is right there, front and center, blocking his own body. He's got his men's ministry logo on his hat. Sean Foyt has his own nonprofit ministry on his shirt. So there's no interest in like furthering the growth of your church. It's all about your own brand. And so that's what kind of binds these guys. So it's a little opportunistic and but yeah, so Trinity was wild. This church that Mark Driscoll has launched. So, on a given weekend at Trinity Church in Scottsdale, they only have one location, but probably not for long. They'll get between 4 to 6 thousand people on a given weekend. But like on a given YouTube video that he posts, he'll get over 100,000 views or way more, which kind of goes back to the point about that survey. Like, how useful is it even to talk about political power in the pulpit when it's orders of magnitude more power on Instagram or on YouTube, right? So the service that I went to see at Trinity Church was called as part of this series called Vote Like Jesus. It was in the month leading up to the election. He wrote a book to go with it. And so Trinity Church is, I think at this point, it's 8 years old. It's too big for the building. They're growing really rapidly. He said that they had a capital campaign a few years ago, and he asked people to give $4.6 million. They gave 5.2. People are driving really far to get there. So he said, we're casting a vision for the future here, and everything is on the table. Video campuses are on the table, multi-site campuses are on the table. Like everything he had at Mars Hill, he wants again now in Scottsdale. That's what he wants. And so it just has a much more political flavor to it. And so the actual sermon that I went to hear, the title of the sermon was Should a Christian Be a Nationalist or a Globalist? Which was very odd, and I didn't even really know what that meant and why it was worth asking, but that was it. And it quickly became clear that it was really just an excuse for him to just rage fury at the different issues at play in the election, right? So within 4 minutes, we were talking about fentanyl and the border. Foreign aid for Ukraine came up very quickly, which is interesting now in retrospect. Um, Private property rights, evolution came in at one point, school choice. At one point, he just started like reading off a list of basically everything that kind of circles among the far right media sphere. He's talking about like the G7, the G20, the World Health Organization, the UN, of course, COVID and climate change. And it was kind of a bizarre sort of night. He spoke at one point directly to the young people in the crowd, and he said, "You're being pushed and pressed to be global citizens." He said, "God is for nationalism. Globalism is exactly what Satan would want, and globalism triggers the last days," he said at one point. So, yeah, it was a bizarre night, and I'll play for you again. You won't be able to hear it, but this was the intro video that played before the sermon, and you can see. This is Ronald Reagan's A Time for Choosing speech from the 60s, I think 1964. So he's talking about we have to make a choice here and showing different iconography. You get Kamala Harris here in a second. So in a megachurch worship service, the band plays, it's very loud, the lights go down, and this video comes up. And I mean, it's just, you get Trump pumping his fist and angels and demons and very serious, and then Driscoll shows up and he's clapping and he says, "You ready to go to work?" And he's got his belt buckle on. But it's just an odd scene because this is a really dark building. It's very small. It's packed. This is a Saturday night in October. It's very hot. And if you've ever sat in a megachurch, the music in a megachurch is so loud. It's literally it's like the loudest thing I've ever heard. Like every time I sit through a megachurch worship service, I think it's so loud. Like you feel it vibrate in your chest. It is so like unpleasant to experience for me. But then the band finishes and they step off the screen. Ronald Reagan pops up on the screen. They play this scary video, and then Driscoll comes out and he goes into that 35-minute political rant about globalism. And it was just odd to me. It's just not what I remember. But I think that what researchers like Matthew Taylor have pointed out is true, which is that these guys are no longer bound by like specifically what they believe theologically. And the quote he gave me for the book was that what would have been cause for polemics and heresy 10 years ago is now completely toned down. Like he like is not interested in like calling other people heretics, and people aren't interested in calling him heretics. They're just bound by this political opportunity. And I was watching a video of his right before the election. It was really interesting. It's on YouTube. You can find it. He recorded it. He does these like late night video blogs sometimes. He recorded this video blog in his office, and he had just gotten back from a rally, an evangelical rally. You might remember it right before the election that was put on by Paula White, who is a very influential pastor in the Trump White House. Matthew Taylor actually said she's the most influential Christian in America. She held this evangelical rally in Georgia right before the election. And they invited Driscoll to come. So he flew out there. And at that rally, he met Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk introduced him to JD Vance backstage. And he met Trump. And so he's talking in this video about like how great it was and how honored he was to do that. And it just felt like this kind of like, to me, it felt like this almost like the end of The Godfather, where the door is closing and they're like welcoming him into the family, right? It just felt like a seminal moment to me of political alignment. And so in this video, he says, um, I've decided to get more political. He actually says, I've decided to get more loudmouth on it this year, and I'm not done. And a lot of his rage comes from the pandemic. He talks about lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccine mandates, and how they kept the weed stores and the strip clubs open but forced the churches to close, and that really just pissed him off. And so that led to a lot of this political rage, which manifested, of course, in the election, which was just so chaotic and wild. So it was very eye-opening to kind of see this in person. While I was there, I also went to Dream City Church, which is where Charlie Kirk does a lot of his activities. Dream City is the 30th largest church in the US. They have multiple locations. They still have the big arena. It was not full at all. It was really kind of odd being in there. Big parts of it were partitioned off, so it didn't feel full. It didn't feel bursting. The name of that service that I went to, that sermon was called "The Bible, the Ballot, and Israel." So that was the service I sat through there, and it was very much a pro-Israel rally in a megachurch. And so that's where Charlie Kirk does his activities. And I won't play this video since you can't hear him talking, but I mean, he has become such kind of like a kingmaker on the right. He does his monthly rallies, Freedom Night in America. He does at Dream City. They always have a person from the right come on. Sean Foyt's been on there. Josh Hawley's been on there. Eric Metaxas has been on there. So they do these in a mega church. And then this is an event he had with JD Vance. You might remember this right before the election. And Turning Point is interesting because they have put a huge influence on turning out the vote. And he did an event last year. It was at a megachurch. It might have been Freedom Night in America, where he said at that event that they had enough people in the crowd that night, 5,000 people, if everyone just knocked on 5 doors, they could have flipped Arizona in the 2020 election. And so that tells me just how much influence they're actually putting on turning out the vote. So this event with JD Vance was actually called Chase the Vote. And he's talking in this clip about how if you're scared about living in a Kamala Harris presidency, it's time to do something about it. And it's going to be on every one of us to do something about it, knock on doors, call your friends, and turn out the vote. So yeah, I don't know. So I just kind of to wrap it up, to go back, I think it's just a really interesting moment now, looking back on the election and looking what's coming down the road in the next one. It won't be long. The role that these churches play, and as they grow their power, the role that they're gonna play in the future. So I'll be interested in seeing the 2025 numbers about megachurches because I think during the pandemic, a lot of smaller churches didn't make it. They closed, and the megachurches didn't close. They closed during lockdown, but they didn't close for good. I mean, megachurches were really built for the pandemic. They already had digital platforms. You could tithe on your phone, you could tithe online, you could tithe on Venmo. I mean, this was really the age that they were built for. And so if, First Baptist Church, Anytown, Colorado, with 200 people closes during COVID, where are those 200 people going to go? A lot of them are going to go to a megachurch that has everything to offer, that keeps its doors open, that has amazing kids programming and music and everything. So, I mean, these churches are not, I don't think they're going to stop growing. And so as we think about power and what that looks like politically, I think it has major implications, especially in a state like Arizona where the margins are so tight, right? So, I mean, Charlie Kirk's right. There were enough people in that room, or if they knocked on five doors, I mean, with a margin of 20,000 in an election, every event matters. And so, yeah, so I don't know. I just think it's an interesting moment. And I appreciate you having me. That's all I got. So the book is out. It's out in October. You can pre-order it. Politics is part of it, and then the other parts are these other kind of interesting ways megachurches wield power. So, Jeannie, thanks for having me. It's great to meet everyone here, and I'm happy to just like chat or answer any questions.
No, this was really, really great, Scott. And I'm telling you, there is so much positive feedback and kudos here. Also, a lot of snarky jokes because, we have this chat that ends up being a little bit, spicy, I guess is how you can put it. There are a couple things that came up to me. First one is, so when you said like, Dream City is the, third largest or whatever you said, that when you consider that, you consider all of the dream cities that exist in Arizona or in America, right?
Yeah, so that number I think is totaling like total weekly attendance across all campuses.
Okay, so that was my one question. You were showing another note that I wrote down here. You were showing all the different, Christian flags at a lot of these rallies and concerts and things like that. And here in Arizona, back in, I want to say it was 2022, somehow out of nowhere, an appeal to heaven flag just showed up. And we had a House representative who happened to notice it only because her MAGA neighbor next door had one flag flying under his Trump flag. And so when she asked that, what is that? And they said, oh, it's the appeal to heaven flag and blah, blah, blah. And so she looked it up. When she saw it at the Capitol, she knew that was a sign for Christian nationalism. And so then it magically disappeared. But now with Trump now 47th president again, they're now just putting them on their desks. They're on display everywhere at our Capitol.
Wow.
It's pretty wild. And we have the Freedom Caucus here with several of those Freedom Caucus members, past and present, were also part of the fake electors. I actually just had an interview with a local journalist today, and she asked me, where would you say the Christian nationalists are most in all the levels of government? And I'm like, they're really spread out from school board to city council to, I mean, has that been your experience too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that church, Chino Valley, Jack Hibbs, the guy who endorsed Steve Garvey, they at one point I think they had three of the five school board members went to that church, and so they got coverage in like the Daily Beast where they had some really raucous and rowdy school board meetings, and they produce their own voter guides. They produce a bonkers amount of voter guides all the way down to really really small like municipal elections, school board elections. There's over 200 of them. And the way that they frame it were the questions is exactly like the one from Gateway. And I remember specifically that the voter guide that Chino Valley made for their school board, they asked about candidates' take on gay marriage and abortion and things that had nothing to do with like education or like what you would care that a school board member believes in. It was all like politics for show. So yeah, absolutely. It's all levels. And the appeal to heaven flag is interesting too, that you mentioned. That flag was also at Kingdom to the Capitol. You saw it immediately when it flew at the Capitol, of course. And what's really like just like mind-boggling about these guys when they do these rallies. I heard Sean Foyt say this, and I heard it at Dream City on Sunday morning. They stand up there and they say, "What we're doing is not political." And I mean, they're literally doing it with a huge government building at their back. Like, of course it's political. Like the state capitol is behind him, but it's also not, which is kind of the terrifying part. Like to them, it's not political. It's about, in many cases, it's about the end of the world. It's about like they throw out scriptures about like fires of blood and like plagues on the world and things like that. Like they see it as more of like an Armageddon scenario. So all that iconography plays into that belief system, but it's just like a silly rhetorical thing that's just like, of course it's political, right? Like,
And I mean, these are people who really believe that there is, there's an entire group of lizard people that run around, killing babies and drinking their adrenochrome. So, it's not far-fetched for them to believe that, that they are in a holy war, and they really believe that this is a holy war. This is their calling. Once they've started to drink the Kool-Aid, it's really, really difficult to get them off of that. And then what you pointed out in the very beginning too about how it is their entire existence. I was saying in the chat, you know, for my job, I subscribe to a lot of these little, municipal Facebook pages, right? And we are, we people would always say in Arizona, don't California my Arizona, right? And so now we really are getting conservative Californians from California, from New Mexico, from Colorado, who are tired of their like woke state government. They're coming here, and we're moving to Peoria in 2 weeks. What are your church recommendations? Like, these are the folks who that is the first thing they do is plug their families into that church, because that is their kind of shortcut, right? It's a safety net for them.
yeah. I mean, that was always, so I grew up in Alabama, and that was always the first question when you'd get like a new kid in school, right? It's, oh, where's your family go to church? And like living in Portland now, like that's so funny to me because that's just like a different planet, right? But yeah, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. It's interesting that that's happening in Arizona. I will say for Arizona, so I interviewed a lot of pastors in Arizona, and I tried to interview pastors in Alabama and had a hard time. The ones in Arizona were much more willing to speak than the ones in Alabama, which was interesting about these things.
That is interesting. One thing I noticed in one of your pictures was that Jesus Christ 24 sign. I've seen that sign a lot,
Really?
during the election. And I still, like, just the other day, I drove by a house and saw it in the window, and they all have the same exact font. So I'm wondering, do these churches collaborate more than they compete?
Yeah, so Driscoll made that sign. Trinity Church made that sign. So what he put up a big one in front of the church on the right of way in Scottsdale, and he got an email from the city government saying that they had gotten some complaints that their Jesus Christ 24 sign was blocking the right of way. He showed this email on the screen in church and started making fun of the bureaucrat who sent it. And he was like, "You need to lock down the border before you start caring about what we're doing in front of our church." Then he had enough signs printed for everyone in the church to get one and take them home and put them in front of their houses. So I'm guessing that the ones you're seeing are people who got them through Trinity Church if they could get them online or whatever. But it's also possible that he just has them available or people got them from wherever. I mean, I walked out of Dream City Church and people were carrying political signs for like Prop 38, Prop 139, whatever it was. People are getting these signs there, but that's so funny that you're seeing that sign. That was absolutely like a political troll act that he did.
And but I mean, I feel like I could see, people at Dream City passing it out, at Trinity, at CCV. It just makes me wonder, like they're like, hey, we're different churches, but we all believe in Christian nationalism. So here's a bunch of signs or whatever, you know. Uh,
Yeah, I can see that too.
there was a question in the chat, and I can't remember who asked it now, and it's too hard to scroll up, but somebody asked, what I think it was about like demographics, and is there a specific demographic that they're going after, or is there one demographic that seems to be built, growing the fastest? Do you have an answer to that?
That's a great question. So I think a lot of mega churches are working to appeal to the younger demographics. And I actually spend a the a big chunk of the book, the middle third of the book, is specifically about megachurch colleges and megachurch training programs, which are really exploding. So a lot of these churches, almost all of the top 25 ultra mega churches have launched their own college or their own ministry training program. Driscoll has said he wants Trinity Church to have a college. Many of these colleges are unaccredited, but not all of them. A lot of them partner with online universities, like Southeastern University is one based out of Florida. where you can get an online degree through an accredited institution, but you get to go to your university in the actual building of the megachurch. They have internships and ministry training programs and boot camps and like things to, I think they're really trying to bring the 18 to 25 demographic back into church because that's always been the group that walks out, right? And like guilty. So like you grow up in the church, you stay there through high school, you go off to college, and then eventually you're done. Like that was always the group I heard growing up that always leaves church. There's so many ways now for them to bring them back, and education is a big part of it. They've also launched their own like secondary schools, elementary schools, and high schools. There's a lot of megachurch schools, but also just like the family programming that they offer, the kids programming that they offer, it's really world class. Like Church of the Highlands, who I have to say takes up a big part of the book because I'm from Alabama. Like they actually have a ministry specifically for kids with special needs. And
Wow.
like say what you will about a megachurch, like it would be so much harder to go to like a small church if you had a child with really severe special needs, right? You could trust that the large church is going to take care of them for an hour, you get a break and you get to go. So I think family ministry says a lot. I think colleges and education says a lot. I really think that as churches trend older and each generation kind of steps further and further away, they really want to bring young families and teenagers and adolescents back.
Hmm. Yeah, the one thing that stuck out too, and you said, Christian nationalist or Christian globalist. Does anybody, you probably can't answer this, but I'm like, didn't God create the whole world? Wouldn't God care about the whole globe? Like, I just wonder, do they even contemplate that kind of stuff, or do they just kind of brush right past it? How does that work?
The only sort of biblical citation that he gave that night was the story of the Tower of Babel, which that's a very funny question, by the way. But it was the story of the Tower of Babel, right, where they tried to build a tower to reach heaven and they were struck down, and that's where like God like made all the languages and no one could understand each other, and so that was his example of how God is against globalism and he was for nationalism, and so. No, I mean, the attack on foreign aid. So a lot of my work, other life has been in foreign aid. And so that has been extremely heartbreaking and difficult for me over the last few months in particular. And I found it just really telling that he called out foreign aid to Ukraine within the first 5 minutes of that sermon, quite frankly. Um, so yeah, no, I mean it was 100% nationalism. There was no like your brother, your sister in another country. It was all praise.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's wild too, and I'm not even a religious person, but to use examples from a Bible that I'm not really, I'm not a believer in, but it's really frustrating. We have two Democratic legislators in the state of Arizona who are ordained ministers, and then we have two Republicans. And the two Democrats actually we introduced us for our secular day at the Capitol. And the entire Freedom Caucus walked off the floor of the House of Representatives in protest of the fact that the separation of church and state people were there. So that was a weird choice, but that's the vibe in Arizona.
Yeah. Wow. That's so sad.
Um, I know it really is. Um, so, we're almost out of time and I want to honor your time. First of all, again, so many compliments here. Somebody already pre-ordered one of your books. I don't do hardcovers, so I'm going to have to wait, or I'll just do an audio book or something like that. But very excited about your book. We always try to end each discussion on our Fridays in an upbeat kind of way. So I always ask our guests, what gives you hope? You're here studying these mega churches, these grifters, these charlatans. So in the midst of all that, what gives you hope?
Oh man, thanks for asking that. This was a difficult couple of years to report this book. This is not the book I set out to write, by the way, but you take the opportunity in front of you. And to kind of embed myself with these guys for a couple of years was tough. What gave me hope were the people I met, the survivors that I met, who had endured really unimaginable harm or trauma in their churches, seeing how they had gone through the healing process and how they had walked through it. So I went through a very painful like deconstruction process of my faith years ago. I think a lot of people have. And it can leave you really spinning. It can kind of leave you feeling lost. You grieve it really in a way. But I met
Mhm.
people who experienced like sexual assault, physical assault, real pain in a church, and to just sit with them and hear how they've worked through it and come out stronger, uh, and could like go climb a 14,000-foot mountain and stand at the top of it and breathe the air and know that you found your own way through to the other side. Everyone's healing journey looks different, but they were all inspiring. I think that's what gives me hope. And that's why at the end of the day, I wanted to do this book was to give them a chance to talk. And so I hope you get to meet them, the amazing people who really were the ones who experienced pain in these churches and came out the other side.
Yeah, we've had a few of them that, what they call themselves evangelicals.
Yeah.
First that comes to mind is like Rick Pidcock is a great one. And Kate West came on. I read her book and I love her too because I follow her now on Blue Sky. And, because she was raised evangelical and like internet was kind of no and all that kind of like she'll post these things. I think or it could be Talia. I'm not sure. One of those evangelicals. But then they'll write, post about, I'm watching Cheers for the first time. This is hilarious. I just love that kind of wholesome stuff. Like, I'm doing this for the first time and I'm
Yeah.
40 years old. It's so
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Sarah McCammon's book, The Ex-Evangelical. She's the national political reporter for NPR. I interviewed her for the book. Her book, The Ex-Evangelicals, is great. It's full of stories like that. Blake Chastain and Chrissy Stroop, others in the chat that you've had before, are similarly great reporters. So, yeah, I love that stuff too, Jeannie.
Right on, right on. Well, it's been so great to meet you, Scott, and I really look forward to the book. This was a fantastic discussion because, we have so many people who talk about Christian nationalism, but so it's sometimes hard to find something new about it, but you really provided us with some new information today. So for that, I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for having me. It was an honor to meet you. I'll come back anytime and hope everyone has a great long weekend.
Right on. Thanks, Scott, and thanks everybody. Have a great weekend. See y'all next week.